Queens during the Amarna period, as well as earlier dynasties, were traditionally depicted as youthful and heavily idealized, like the Berlin bust of Nefertiti and the Memphite head of Queen Nefertiti. The representation of middle and old age was traditionally reserved for servants and non-royals, both male and female, like the figurine of a miller, as well as kings, like Senwosret III as a sphinx. Portrayals of aging queens from the late 18th dynasty in the Amarna period typically did not make it into public view, and many of them were found within the remaining walls of their sculptor's workshop. Two examples of these sculptures include the head of Queen Tai and the standing statuette of Nefertiti. These depictions of the aging queens were possibly never seen by the community or even the queens themselves because they may have been unfinished, but also because they presented unidealized and naturalistic images of the queens. The Amarna period in Egypt was revolutionary because of the replacement of traditional ancient Egyptian religious customs. This period saw the innovation of many artists and sculptors. At Amarna, there was a rise in the amount of artist workshops, the most prominent of them all being the workshop of Thutmose, the chief sculptor. Thutmose is one of the few ancient Egyptian artists whose name is known and whose style can be identified, working for multiple rulers and their wives. Two major kings during the 18th dynasty in the Amarna period who helped foster the growth of this new style and the workshop of Thutmose were Amenhotep III and Akhenaten, and their wives Tai and Nefertiti. While both kings acquired multiple wives during their reigns, the most important of these two were Queen Tai, married to Amenhotep III, and Queen Nefertiti, who was married to Akhenaten. Queen Tai rose to the rank of the king's chief wife and was known as the commoner queen since her parents were non-royals. Queen Nefertiti, Akhenaten's chief wife, her name meant the beautiful one is here. One of the most idealized representations of queenly beauty is the bust of Nefertiti, now at the Egyptian Museum in Berlin. In earlier dynasties, as well as the earlier stages of the Amarna period, queens were typically depicted as youthful and idealized. Elite women portrayed in tomb chapels were supposed to be sexually attractive to assist in their husband's regeneration and rebirth in the afterworld. Servant and non-elite women were portrayed more often with lined faces and drooping breasts. The bust of Nefertiti, recovered from the workshop at Thutmose in Amarna and dated circa 1345 BC, is made of painted limestone and gypsum. In this representation of the queen, she is shown wearing a dark blue, flat-topped headdress. The headdress also includes a multicolored gold band encircling it with uraeus in the center, and she is also adorned with extravagant collared necklace. Her neck is quite slender and muscular, but this slenderness emphasizes the ideal beauty of the queen. The slender neck also draws attention to the attractiveness and symmetricity of Nefertiti's facial features. Even though Nefertiti was portrayed in this bust as encompassing a symmetrical beauty and youth, she was never publicly displayed until she was discovered and acquired by the Egyptian Museum in Berlin. This is probably because she remains slightly unfinished, missing an inlay in her left eye. Other than that, this bust looks quite complete, and it is questionable as to exactly why Thutmose never presented it to the queen or the kingdom. Was he self-conscious of his work? Was he doubtful that the queen would accept it? Like this one, there were many other ideal representations of the queen which were not publicly displayed. The Memphite head of Queen Nefertiti, now housed in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, is made from brown quartzite, a much lighter shade of brown compared to the Berlin bust. Also like the face of the Berlin Nefertiti, this face of the queen is slender and youthful with high cheekbones, almond-shaped eyes that taper out towards the temples, full lips with defined cupid's bow, as well as pinned back ears. This head is also unfinished and is missing key pieces, like a large portion of the nose, small pieces of the ears, inlays in the eye sockets and eyebrows, and the headdress. This sculpture possesses a softness and sensitivity to the material, but also is highly proportional. Because of these many details, this head has been attributed to the workshop of Thutmose, who may have had apprentices in Memphis where this head was discovered. Like the Berlin bust, we do not know if it was ever viewed by the public or the queen herself. While multiple idealized and youthful representations of Nefertiti exist, there was also a shift towards a more naturalistic style that depicted Nefertiti and Tai with various signs of aging. But before we get into the details about this style shift during the late 18th dynasty and the Amarna period, there must be an exploration of what constitutes a sign of age. Some major characteristics of aging include lines on the forehead, bags under the eyes, deep creases running from the outer corners of the nose to the corners of the mouth, rounded face and full cheeks, full lips, bulbous nose, pendulous breasts, protruding abdomen, sagging facial and neck skin, sunken-in cheeks, heavy lidded eyes, sunken bulging eyes, as well as deep wrinkles. These characteristics could possibly be linked to diseases, poor diet, sun exposure, etc., but people generally associate them with old age and a progressive increase throughout life, and typically not with representations of queens. The representation of old age and the listed characteristics of age were traditionally reserved for the portrayals of common women and servants, as well as kings. The figurine of a miller from the Old Kingdom, now located at the Louvre, represents an unidealized and naturalistic depiction of a female worker. While she is missing her arms, we can tell from the workstation and her crouched-down body language that she is probably grinding something, possibly grain for bread or beer. Figurines of working women and men like this one were traditionally left in burial chambers of royalty, so they would have sustenance, food and drink, as well as service in the afterlife. Unlike the youthful figures that were examined before, this figurine shows a woman who is well past her prime. The sculptor has given her many signs of aging, including pendulous breasts, sunken cheeks, deep wrinkles around the mouth and bulbous nose and in between the eyebrows, as well as sagging skin around the neck. But why was this portrayal of old age allowed during the Old Kingdom? Signs of aging like this showed the wares of daily life, in that she may have been a hard worker who spent a lot of time milling. Since youth and beauty was supposed to be reserved for the depiction of wives in the burial chamber, depictions of queens were supposed to possess a delectable youthfulness. Servant figures were allowed to show age and were allowed to be unidealized, since they were not typically displayed publicly. Senwosret III as a sphinx, now at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, dates to the 12th dynasty. While many portrayals of kings and queens in Egypt were highly idealized, this one shows humanity and age. This statue shows Senwosret III in sphinx form, while sagging cheeks, bags under his heavy-lidded eyes, deep wrinkled creases from the corner of his nostrils to his mouth, lips shaped in a protruding frown with a deep crease in his chin. Even his eyebrows possess a sadness. In the Middle Kingdom, representations on reliefs of toil-worn age are even more frequent. Heads of the aging Senwosret III show the king with a lined, sagging, and weary face. Even though they expressed advancing age, these representations were viewed as positive images of success and wisdom, and were therefore displayed publicly throughout the kingdom. For men, old age signified experience and authority. The statue of Senwosret III as a sphinx was probably displayed outside the burial temple or pyramid complex of the deceased king for the public to see, acting as a symbol of Senwosret's kingly power and success as a ruler in the 12th dynasty. His age emphasizes his level of respectability. For queens, this could be seen as quite the opposite. Unlike Senwosret III as a sphinx from the Middle Kingdom, women were rarely shown in diverse stages of aging. It desexualized them and made them less appealing. The toils of age showed them to be fatigued both physically and mentally. With the end of the 18th dynasty and the Amarna period, portrayals of queens began to possess an aging likeness to their husbands and kings from prior dynasties. This is especially seen in images of Queen Tai and Nefertiti. But unlike their male counterpart, the following representations of the queens were never made public, instead found within the remains of the workshops where they were made. The head of Queen Tai was created during the 18th dynasty. Queen Tai was known for a forceful, energetic nature, but this head was quite individualized. In the sculpture of Tai, she is depicted as beyond her youth, possibly middle age, or even a little older than that, and she is not very idealized. This sculpture portrays Tai as a wise elder woman, the wrinkled female equivalent of the plump, successful man. She has a large nose as well as a large mouth with very full lips. From her prominent nostrils down to the corners of her mouth, the artist has included very deep lines, giving the figure a frowning expression. The lines also show her life experience, along with her heavy eyelids and sagging jowls. While the head of Queen Tiye was found in the Medinet El Gharab, there is no physical or written evidence which tells us whether she was publicly or privately displayed. Because of her aging characteristics, one can imagine that she may have not been publicly displayed or even used for decoration around the kingdom, since queens were typically supposed to represent youthful and sexually inviting women. Instead, the sculptor has portrayed Tiye with an expression of imperious grim, almost scowling. The head may have never been exhibited publicly during its time because of this harsh expression, but also because it was highly naturalistic. Another sculpture, which follows the same style, is the standing statuette of Nefertiti. The standing statuette of Nefertiti, now housed at the Egyptian Museum in Berlin, was created during the Amarna period. This 15-inch limestone statuette was found in numerous broken pieces throughout what was considered Thutmose's pantry, and depicts an aging interpretation of the queen. She is shown with both her arms hanging down by her side, her left hand flat with knuckles facing us. She is shown wearing a tightly clinging dress with what looks like a short sleeve on the right arm. She also wears a cap crown with a hole in the forehead, maybe where a uraeus once was, and a pair of sandals. While she has been portrayed as not being youthful nor elder, she is shown highly individualized, much unlike the idealized Berlin bust and Memphite head of Nefertiti. In this statuette, her face depicted as being lean yet still heavy, the corners of her mouth and cheeks slightly sagging. She also has deep laugh lines carved from both corners of her mouth down her chin and neck, the expression she gives being rather hostile. Along with these characteristics, her breasts and stomach also droop and protrude, which reinforces the signs of aging exhibited in her face, demonstrating a combination both of aging face and body, which is quite rare on a statue of a woman, no less a queen. While signs of aging were viewed positively on statues of kings and were displayed publicly, one is to wonder if Nefertiti or the kingdom ever approved of or saw this statue. Since the statue was found in Thutmose's pantry and not in a burial site or temple, it is more than likely that the statue was either unfinished or possibly a sketch for a later statue which was never completed. Another possible reason as to why the statue was unfinished and not publicly displayed was because of the circumstances surrounding the queen herself and why she was portrayed in this manner. Nefertiti has remained a highly mysterious queen. This statuette of Nefertiti exhibits an expression of sadness tinged with resignation, a sad and somehow very lonely figure carved after the death of the royal children is intended to show a mother aged by grief. What Dorothea Arnold has called an expression of resignation could have to do with the speculation about the disappearance of Nefertiti. The theory states that the queen disappeared completely from the kingdom, perhaps wrought with the grief of her children's deaths. The only evidence for this claim being the fact that Nefertiti is not allocated a tomb and her body is missing. This could have also been a reason as to why this statue was never made public, or it was purely because it showed an aging representation of the queen which was not accepted by the king or queen herself, even though she was viewed as proxy to her husband and a wise woman to the family. Whether an artwork is displayed for public viewing or kept under wraps will always remain a question for artists and patrons, no matter the century or geographic region. During the late 18th dynasty and the Amarna period in Egypt, this was a possibility for many artists and their workshops. Many of the sculptures discussed through this research and analysis were not publicly displayed, possibly because of their unfinished quality or maybe because of their individualized representations, something many were not accustomed to. But individualization could have not been the major determining factor for the publicity of an artwork. Presentation of self depends on class, status, age, sex, gender, marital status, ethnicity, etc. The sculpture of Senwosret III as a sphinx shows an elder and more personalized depiction of the 12th dynasty ruler, his wrinkled facial features viewed as elements of experience and wisdom. Unlike the statue of Senwosret III, the head of Queen Tiye and the standing statuette of Nefertiti depicted the queens in a less positive light, concession paid to the savages of time. These women portrayed with pendulous breasts, sagging facial skin, protruding stomachs, etc., have been ravaged by the wearers of daily life, characteristics typically reserved for servant statues and common women. These women were viewed as highly individual, like Senwosret III as a sphinx, but unlike him, were hidden from public view.